Okay, another walk at Holden here. Briefly, I just got back from the dentist. Hopefully my voice is not too slurred. My mouth is still numb. I highly recommend Dr. Alyssa Kowalski in Willoughby and her wonderful staff. They always do a great job. Getting a crown today, and we'll see how that goes. So yeah, I think I have a few things to talk about today, but also it's just a beautiful day, and I thought I would just go for a walk before getting back into work, because once I get back into that, I get immersed and I'll be stuck in that for hours. So I thought, while the weather's nice, blue sky again, we'll just take a walk and see. Another wonderful day here at Holden, as well as whatever comes to mind. One thing I thought about today as I was sitting in the dentist chair is we talked a lot about thought and its usefulness, finding its place, but also not giving it more importance than it needs to have in certain areas of our life, such as our psychological knowledge about ourselves. And this is really probably very tricky because, and obviously to do the dental work that was done today required a lot of skill, a lot of thought, knowledge. They even used a really cool new 3D scanning device now to generate a three-dimensional image of all the teeth in your mouth, and this is used to create the crown now, rather than have the old impressions that they used to do, which were very distasteful, and for someone like me prone to gagging, it was often a very unpleasant experience, which I actually forgot about until I saw her using the new scanning machine, and I was like, well, that's really cool. I guess they've had it for a couple years, but I haven't needed it, so I haven't known. But that is an example of the thought can accomplish great things, right? That thinking, knowledge, science, engineering can accomplish amazing technical feats, and that's not to be discredited when we talk about thought and the ending of thought and finding the right place for thought. We have to keep in mind, we're never saying we shouldn't have that knowledge and use that knowledge to accomplish things like that. And obviously, we just recently sent a space capsule around the moon with amazing precision, and that's another great example of thought. However, thought also is used to create the weapons of mass destruction that we're currently using to kill people more efficiently than we ever have before in other countries around the world. And that is the brutal honesty of thought, right? Is that it has no internal compassion or morality or love. Thought is a tool, in a sense. It's a mechanism, a process that can be used, for lack of a better word, for both good and evil, if you want to put it that way, or just it can accomplish amazing things. But there are things that are outside the bound of thought, and that's what we've been talking about. And to see those things, you have to set thought aside. So there are things where thought is useful. There are times when thought is not useful, and intelligence is what allows you to understand the difference. It's not something you can come up with a rule and say, well, under these circumstances thought is useful, and then come up with a very clear set of conditions under which thought can cause harm. It's not that simple, and this is why intelligence of the truest form is required, not the intelligence, the cunning of thought as we went into before, but intelligence beyond thought, the intelligence of love and compassion that is, a higher intelligence in that sense. And so, even when, and I think I said this before, the art of living is putting everything in its proper place, and that includes thought. So it has a proper place. But when it comes to our own existence, this idea of me that we have, that is also built up by thought, me as a unique, permanent or semi-permanent entity, that's when we have to question that aspect of thought, right, that leads us to those conclusions, and see what thought builds up in belief systems and in our imagination that isn't true, right? The falsehoods that aren't true about ourselves and about everything else, and that must come from some other place. So I just wanted to make that distinction, that we understand this isn't something that can be understood again by just listening to my words. I think if you go into this, you understand what I'm saying, or you understand, more importantly, not what I'm saying, but just understand the truth of it all, which is that thought has its proper place, and knowing its proper place is intelligence, and knowing how to see without thought the whole of existence in that sense in a different way is what we're talking about. So just to make that clear. And then I thought, along those lines, I don't think we went into what beauty is, which is obviously on my mind right now. As I look around, I think, this is great and beautiful, what I'm seeing. And what is beauty? This is something philosophers have debated, and we don't want to bring up anything that any philosopher or writer or poet has said about beauty. We want to observe on our own directly what this is. What do we consider this to be? What is beauty? So we say something's beautiful, like right now, what I'm seeing. But what does that actually mean? And can we go into it? What evokes that word? How do we perceive that and say that something is beautiful versus something that's not beautiful? And it's something you really should go into on your own, but since I'm here and I'm talking, I'll explain how I see it. Beauty is something that kind of stops you in your tracks. It's something that awakens something inside you that is bigger than yourself. And it also, beauty is there when the tiny little self is not. This image of ourself, this bundle of memories that we identify with as ourself. That when you see something amazing, so like all this nature, for a moment, you're just looking at it. You're just amazed or in awe by what you're seeing. And in that moment, you forget yourself. And that moment may last a fraction of a second. It may last longer, but usually when we use the word beauty, it's something that's so amazing that it's awe-inspiring. And that means that we sort of forget our problems, our concerns, whatever's going on in our life, and just bask in the glory of what we're seeing. If you're looking at, an amazing mountain in the distance, and you see that mountain and the line of it against the sky, maybe the clouds about the mountain, and just the majesty of it, the volume, the sheer size of that mountain, when you see it, and then that, when you're intently observing that mountain, you're not thinking of yourself. And in that moment of thoughtlessness, in a good way, I guess that's not the right word, but selflessness, when thoughts of yourself are absent, is when beauty arises. It's there. So in a sense, beauty is, the ending of the self, or when the self ends or is forgotten or is not the focus of the moment, then beauty is there. So you could say, in short, beauty is when the self is not. And appreciating that, understanding that is not just, it's not just a perception, right? Beauty is not just a perception. And then in that sense, anything can become beautiful when the self is absent, is another way to look at it. That it's not that there is just one thing that's beautiful and then something that isn't beautiful. Everything in that sense that takes us out of our self-centered nature is beautiful, and we can see beauty in everything. Beauty in the blade of grass, beauty in a grain of sand, beauty in the blue sky, because at that moment we're looking out, not focused on ourselves, whatever we're looking at. A person can be beautiful, all that. So it's just an interesting way to think about beauty, but and I say that with quotes around think, see the truth of it, right? Don't think, we don't want to believe or listen to it, say, yes, you're right, that's what beauty is, I'll remember that definition next time someone asks me. It's like, you have to see it for yourself, see the beauty of where you're at. It's very hard to miss the beauty here, and why I come to these places, because you're surrounded by beautiful things that take you away from yourself, even if just for a moment. And it's important, because we spend so much time of our day focused on ourselves that we don't often step back and appreciate it. And I think that's why we come to places like this, because it takes us away from our daily problems, which are always usually focused around ourselves, and just for a moment we stand in awe of something bigger than ourselves. And it also reminds us of the smallness of ourselves and how much bigger we can be without focusing on all those tiny little problems of our day. There's more to this world and existence than can be dreamt of in your philosophy. So yeah, that's just a little take on beauty. Something else too that I thought of that we could just briefly talk about today is relationship, because life is relationship, and nothing exists in isolation. Nothing is alone. And this is true, we know, from physics, just from studying, which is nothing amazing. That's just observing the world. That you can construct ideal systems where something is isolated from everything else, but it doesn't actually ever exist. There's never true isolation of anything. And then when you think about that from just the physics level, everything's always interacting with everything else, and that's relationship. Interactions between things are relationships. And then you don't need to know anything about physics to then just look at your life and the relationships in your life. What are relationships? You have relationships with people. You have relationships with nature, hopefully. Going out like this is a relationship. You have a relationship with everything you touch, feel, experience, and a relationship with ideas, even thoughts in your mind, and images you have, belief systems that you have, or whatever the relationship is. There's always sort of those two ends of the relationship, and to see life as just a series of relationships, right, that we have with everything is another insight that permeates everything, life as relationships, and then examining these relationships, and that we, relationships can be a mirror into our own mind and allow us to see who we are, because in observing how we interact, say, with people through our relationships reveals more about yourself than perhaps anything else. You may think you're a kind, gracious person, which again is just you thinking that. But then observe in your relationships, are you kind? Are you forgiving? Are you these things you think of, you have an image of yourself. Are you really that, or are you just that image? And observing yourself in relationships with everybody you meet, right, from every person. And then what is your relationship with, say, nature? Because a lot of the problems we have are because we lose that relationship with nature. And if you lose your relationship with nature, you lose your relationship with everything. Because how more real can it be but to understand your place in this natural world and all the beauty around you, and not take any of it for granted. Not that you have to do anything in particular. We're not saying there's some requirement or rule to pay attention to what's around you, but when you do pay attention to what's around you, and especially in nature, and just see its beauty and not miss what it's telling you, then you learn more about yourself. So sometimes learning about yourself means learning about your relationships, and not fooling yourself into thinking that you are a certain way, which I think happens a lot. Right? We think we're a certain way, and then it turns out, oh gosh, I can't believe I just said that to that person, right? And then, okay, you've revealed something about yourself that's important, that maybe you didn't see before. So being aware of your relationships is very important to understanding yourself. And we need to understand ourselves. What is this self that we call the self? That's very important. Hi. So, I think another reason that I come out into nature is to observe my own relationship with nature, and in so doing, understanding myself in that relationship. And once you see yourself in that relationship, right, other things just fall into place, like protecting nature and understanding what an important role, like nature is not just this thing we visit on the weekends, it's what we are immersed in, what we are integrally a part of and cannot be taken out of. And all the things that nature provides to us that we sometimes don't understand, right? Your food doesn't come from a supermarket, it comes from nature. And we lose that connection. So it's just important because it puts everything in perspective. And as we talked about earlier, knowing how to put everything in perspective is the art of living, again. Putting everything in its right place, including nature and your relationships. And so relationships are a mirror, and it can be a clear mirror. Like if you want to see what you look like, you look in a mirror that's not distorted. If your mirror has toothpaste all over it, and you look into it, you're not going to see a very clear image of yourself. So you have to clean that mirror in order to see yourself in that mirror. And in the same way, our relationships act as a very clear mirror that is, if you don't fool yourself, right? If you don't bring the past in and you don't bring the history in, then relationships are a very clear, clean, pure mirror of your mind, who you are and think you are. So there's that, and I think just another aspect of things. And the importance is not listening to me speak about any of this. I had a vague idea, okay, let's talk about maybe beauty today or whatever, but I enjoy the very process of inquiring. I enjoy this process, this inquiry itself, because it amazes me sometimes what I say about don't know. Sometimes when I listen back to what I say, it's like it's interesting. I don't know where that came from, but it comes from maybe a truer place within yourself, when you're not trying to accomplish something or trying to get the words out right. Then words come. And just thinking of this in terms of your brain and the power of your brain, that when your brain is operating as a whole, when we're not just using a part of it, the brain is much more powerful than it is when it's focused on one thing. And often the brain is only focused on one thing, yourself. When you're self-centered, it's very tiny. It's focused on that little tiny self, which is this little bundle of memories that believes it's an independent, permanent entity. And that limits it. There's an entire universe to be observed, an entire universe that exists, and don't limit yourself to just this tiny little part of it that you call me. And if every action is driven towards that, it's like a groove. It's a very limited, small thing. Don't be that limited, small thing. Be all, be everything. And that is by observing your own limitedness, your own limitations. Can you become that? Or just be aware of that. It's not become anything. It's just be aware of it. So, yeah, there's that. We'll just take a pause here and look at the Corning Lake. Something else I thought of today at the dentist's office is pain, right? I think it's maybe something everyone thinks about when they go. And I have to say that because of the professionalism of Dr. Kowalski and her staff, I've experienced very little pain to none, little to none. But it's an opportunity anytime something like this arises for us to observe pain, what we call pain, and also the fear that can arise in addition to pain, right? You can make pain worse. Pain itself is a sensation, nothing more. Your nerves are sending signals to your brain, right? That has to happen. That's just a normal, natural, biological thing. You can't stop that. But when it reaches the brain, what happens to it then, thought gets in the way, and thought can amplify or magnify that and make something small, something big. And I think if you pay attention to that process, right, you experience a sensation, maybe pain, and then observe how it can go, how it can become amplified by thoughts. What is that sensation? I've never seen it. What does it mean? Oh, I'm dying. they're doing something wrong, whatever it is. And that thinking makes it worse. And it reminds me, I'm probably going to get this wrong. There's a parable or a sutta, the Buddha. I think it's called the double arrow, or it's like being. So there's one called the poison arrow, which is not this, but there's one also where it talks about pain and suffering. There's sort of the initial pain and suffering, which is like a first arrow, right, that you get hit with. But then there's like a second arrow, which is like everything that follows that. You know, like it's like being hit twice. And if you're aware of just the first arrow of the pain itself as a sensation, you don't get hit by that second arrow. And all that requires is awareness, right? Just be aware of the pain, aware of what's happening. So Jiddu Krishnamurti, who is obviously someone I greatly admire and listen to, used to have all his dental work done without any anesthetic. He couldn't have anesthetic because he was a very sensitive person, and any sort of medicine or anesthesia would become amplified, because being a sensitive person, right, sensitive senses, very aware of the senses, is sort of a key to awareness, right? Is that you have to be aware of your senses, keenly aware of all your senses. And if you are a person like that, who has opened up and become very sensitive, then anything like that, you almost can't tolerate it. It's too intense. I also know he couldn't eat very spicy food. He had to eat very mild things, just because of his nature, right? But as I said, he had no anesthetic, so he would go get his teeth drilled on and extracted, and he had a lot of dental work, from what I understand, but never took any anesthetic. And because a person who is deeply aware of themselves and sensitive and understands pain for what it is, doesn't fear pain, knows how to deal with it, right, with physical pain, and also knows how to deal with emotional pain, with all these other forms of pain, right, that you let them come as sensations, but you don't hold on to them. So they leave just as fast as they come. You know, pain is like a temporary sensory reaction. You don't have to hold on to it. You don't have to remember it. Because fear comes from remembering that pain and saying, I don't want to have that again. So maybe if you experience pain in a dental office and then you go back and say, oh, I don't want that pain again. Well, you're afraid. That's the origin of fear, as we talked about. It's memory. It's time and thought. Time being, thought being the memories of something bad or unpleasant, and then time being projecting that into the future and saying, I don't want that to happen again. If you don't do that, you don't have fear, because you understand fear. You understand what it is. And you may have experienced the sensation of pain, but not the fear pain, and not the full psychological impact of pain. And then it's just a way to deal with things in your life, right? To observe them for what they are, not make them worse, not amplify them. But as I said, I experienced little to no pain in the dental office today, so I don't know if that's because of my awareness of pain, or more likely they just did a great job, which they always do. And they gave me the anesthetic in such a sequenced way, you know, with vibrations and other things to, you know, to take your mind off of, which is another interesting thing, because they do a lot of distraction, like the, you know, something moving in your cheek or something vibrating, and you'd say pay attention to that. And what's interesting is if you don't pay attention to the pain, it lessens the pain. This is very interesting, right? What does that mean? That means your perception of the pain is what's causing a lot of the pain. Your awareness of the pain, your dwelling on the pain. So if your mind is elsewhere, you know, focusing on something else that's happening, then the impact of that pain is less. It doesn't require a mechanical device for that, right? It doesn't require, the mind itself can be in such a state. that it doesn't give any energy to that pain any more than it has to. So, as we talked about, observation is awareness, or observation and awareness are learning. Learning not in accumulation of knowledge, but learning about what pain is, what sensation is, right? Not in some way that's stored in memory, but in some deeper way. There's other ways of learning besides just accumulating knowledge. So you can learn about pain, learn about how you handle pain. So I thought that was also interesting today. And everything that happens to us is an experience that we can learn from, and observe from. More importantly, not just experience, right? Because experience is sort of like the accumulation of knowledge. For there to be experience, you have to have an experiencer, one who experiences, and that gives power to this idea of ourself, again, as a separate entity. So experience itself can be an amplifying effect on the me, of this idea of myself. Whereas sensation in the moment and learning and observing, just that sensation, not holding on to it, as experience. Because another thing, to have an experience, you have to equate it to something in your past, right? Like when you have to remember it, and you have to often remember it in terms of something you've known before. So when you say, I had a great experience, it was like this, it was that. When you're using words to describe your experience, words come from the past, right? So you're describing this new experience with words, which makes it old, not new. So you really can never experience anything new as long as you experience. As long as you use words, you perceive it through your past history. It ends, right? It just becomes an old, dead thing. So without using that word, to be fully present and aware without the use of words or language or relating it to the past is pure awareness, choiceless awareness, attention, which is something else altogether. So anyways, that's maybe enough for now. I think we'll cut this short. I have to get back to work and some other things, but I just thought such a beautiful day, I didn't want it to go to waste. And I will talk to you guys later.